Hi, welcome back to Talk Right, your source of all things writing and literature. Today, in another episode of our series of Brilliant Beginnings, I wanted to take a look at Vladimir Nabokov's classic 1955 novel, Lolita. Now, anybody who's read this novel knows that this novel is just packed through with wonderful linguistic gems and probably one of the most monstrous characters that we have in all of modern literature. So it's no surprise that Nabokov, if you've ever read any of his work, is a master prose stylist. In fact, he admits as much in the first few pages of his novel. What I wanted to do is take a deep dive into the first few pages and just see how much we get of this awful protagonist and just how marvelous Nabokov's style is. Lolita, light of my life, fire of my loins, my sin, my soul. Lo-li-ta, the tip of the tongue taking a trip of 3 steps down the palate to tap at 3 on the teeth. Lo-li-ta. She was low, plain low, in the morning, standing 4 feet 10 in one sock. She was Lola in slacks. She was Dolly at school. She was Dolores on the dotted line, but in my arms she was always Lolita. Did she have a precursor? She did, indeed she did. In point of fact, there might have been no Lolita at all had I not loved, one summer, a certain initial girl child, in a princedom by the sea. Oh, when? About as many years before Lolita was born as my age was that summer. You can always count on a murderer for a fancy prose style. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, exhibit number 1 is what the seraphs, the misinformed, simple, noble winged seraphs, envied. Look at this tangle of thorns. 2. I was born in 1910 in Paris. My father was a gentle, easygoing person, a salad of racial genes, a Swiss citizen of mixed French and Austrian descent, with a dash of the Danube in his veins. I'm going to pass around in a minute some lovely glossy blue picture postcards. He owned a luxurious hotel on the Riviera. His father and 2 grandfathers had sold wine, jewels, and silk, respectively. At 30, he married an English girl, daughter of Jerome Dunn, the alpinist, and granddaughter of 2 Dorset parsons, experts in obscure subjects, paleopodology and aeolian harps, respectively. My very photogenic mother died in a freak accident, picnic lightning, when I was 3, and save for a pocket of warmth in the darkest past, nothing of her subsists within the hollows and dells of memory over which, if you can still stand my style, I am writing under observation, the sun of my infancy had set. Surely you all know those redolent remnants of day suspended, with the midges about some hedge in bloom, or suddenly entered and traversed by the rambler at the bottom of a hill in the summer dusk, a furry warmth, golden midges. My mother's elder sister, Sybil, whom a cousin of the father's had married and then neglected, served in my immediate family as a kind of unpaid governess and housekeeper. Somebody told me later that she had been in love with my father, and that he had light-heartedly taken advantage of it one rainy day and forgotten it by the time the weather cleared. I was extremely fond of her, despite the rigidity, the fatal rigidity, of some of her rules. Perhaps she wanted to make of me, in the fullness of time, a better widower than my father. Aunt Sybil had pink-rimmed azure eyes and a waxen complexion. She wrote poetry. She was poetically superstitious. She said she knew she would die soon after my 16th birthday, and did. Her husband, a great traveler in perfumes, spent most of his time in America, where eventually he founded a firm and acquired a bit of real estate. I grew a happy, healthy child in a bright world of illustrated books, clean sand, orange trees, friendly dogs, sea vistas, and smiling faces. Around me, the splendid Hotel Mirana revolved as a kind of private universe, a whitewashed cosmos within the blue greater one that blazed outside. From the aproned pot scrubber to the flanneled potentate, everybody liked me, everybody petted me. Elderly American ladies leaning on their canes listed toward me like towers of Pisa. Ruined Russian princesses, who could not pay my father, bought me expensive bonbons. He, mon cher petit papa, took me out boating and biking, taught me to swim and dive and water ski, read to me Don Quixote and Les Miserables, and I adored and respected him and felt glad for him whenever I overheard the servants discuss his various lady friends, beautiful and kind beings who made much of me and cooed and shed precious tears over my cheerful motherlessness. I attended an English day school a few miles from home, and there I played rackets and fives and got excellent marks and was on perfect terms with schoolmates and teachers alike. The only definite sexual events that I can remember as having occurred before my 13th birthday, that is, before I first saw my little Annabelle, were a solemn, decorous, and purely theoretical talk about pubertal surprises in the rose garden of the school with an American kid, the son of a then celebrated motion picture actress whom he seldom saw in the three-dimensional world, and some interesting reactions on the part of my organism to certain photographs, pearl and umbra, with infinitely soft partings in Pichon's sumptuous La Beauté Humaine that I had filched from under a mountain of marble-bound graphique in the hotel library. Later, in his delightful debonair manner, my father gave me all the information he thought I needed about sex. This was just before sending me, in the autumn of 1923, to a lycée in Lyon, where we were to spend 3 winters. But alas, in the summer of that year, he was touring Italy with Mademoiselle de R and her daughter, and I had nobody to complain to, nobody to consult. Okay, now if that beginning doesn't just show you how adept Nabokov is at language, then nothing will. What I love about this is, having studied a little bit of Russian, Nabokov hits upon one of the primary allophonic differences in Russian that we don't have in English. That is the difference between the hard L, the lo, and the soft L, the li. They are 2 distinctive sounds. We don't really make this distinction that well in English. I mean, it doesn't really matter if you say something like lollipop versus lollipop. I mean, it's the same thing. In Russian, however, these are 2 separate sounds and they can make 2 separate words. So it's an extremely important difference in Russian. Nabokov captures it right here. And then he talks about just the physiological response of the mouth as it is making this sound, the lo, the li, and the ta. The tongue is actually traveling down the palate, as he says here. What a marvelous encapsulation of sounds. Now, the other reason I love this opening segment is because of how much it shows about its main character. These opening lines where he's talking about Lolita, light of my life, fire of my loins, my sin, my soul. It shows you, number one, that he's absolutely obsessed with her. No surprise, because the novel's called Lolita. What it also shows is that he is obsessed with himself. Listen how many times he says the word my. He says my life, my loins, my sin, my soul. Lolita never speaks for herself here. It is completely Humbert who is speaking for her. Now, if that sounds a little bit arbitrary, like I might just be pulling this interpretation out, in one of Nabokov's most famous novels, Pale Fire, it's all about this theme of somebody taking over somebody else's voice in order to put his own personality or his own story, his own narrative over that other person. That's precisely what Humbert is doing here, and we catch on to that the more we read the novel. We also know that this love has come to a bad end, definitely for him, because he is addressing, in the final paragraph, the ladies and gentlemen of the jury having committed murder, but we also don't know who the victim is. Having only been introduced to Lolita and knowing that she is his sin, we might conclude that he in fact has killed her. So this love is a sinful love. It leads to his being convicted of murder, and it leads to the victim itself. So right here we have Humbert's character, his obsession, we have Nabokov's absolute facility with language, and we have the whole plot right here. Because of his obsession, somebody dies and he's been captured. I've already mentioned the language, which is such a huge part of the story. In fact, you might say that Humbert's language essentially is the story. We fall in love with him as a character because we fall in love with his voice. And it is because of this love of his language that we ultimately become voyeurs to the absolutely horrendous things he does later in the novel. But how does Nabokov achieve this language? I'll talk about his use of tone and genre in just a second. One of the things he does, though, is he slips in so many precise details. He had the details of his Aunt Sybil's eyes. He calls them pink-rimmed eyes and azure eyes, and he gives her a waxen complexion. This tripartite series of colors, the pink and the blue and the pale white, they all form some of the color of this backdrop. We also have the blue he talks about of the Riviera, of the Danube that flows through his father's blood, of the seaside where he's brought up. There's also the obvious romanticizing of the style, and the narrator himself tells us about this. In the second section, after he's mentioned his mother's death, he then talks about sort of the sunset of his infancy. Listen to how he describes it. The sun of my infancy had set. Surely you all know those redolent remnants of days suspended with the midges about some hedge in bloom or suddenly entered and traversed by the rambler at the bottom of a hill in the summer dusk, a furry warmth, golden midges. So this obvious poeticism of his youth, it's no accident. He is just working up this style and trying to get the audience on his side. Not only the audience of the jury, but also the audience of us, the readers, who are, in a sense, the jury. We also have these long, florid sentences which contain so much narrative detail. Here, towards the end, when he's talking about his sort of sexual precocity or his knowledge about sex, listen to this one sentence. The only definite sexual events that I can remember as having occurred before my 13th birthday, that is, before I first saw my little Annabelle, were a solemn, decorous, and purely theoretical talk about pubertal surprises in the rose garden of the school with an American kid, the son of a then celebrated motion picture actress whom he seldom saw in the three-dimensional world, and some interesting reactions on the part of my organism to certain photographs, Pearl and Umbra, with infinitely soft partings in Pichon's sumptuous La Beauté Humaine that I had filched from under a mountain of marble-bound graphics in the hotel library. And notice some of the Nabokovisms I've already talked about. We have the use of color, Pearl and Umbra. We have the use of these precise details. The Pichon's La Beauté Humaine magazine, the marble-bound graphique, again, a book of some sort. We also have all of the backstory that he's providing. We have the American kid who's his mate, and then we have the story of him stealing this magazine from the hotel library and having a strange arousal from it. So in this long sentence, we have all these details packed in. This gives Nabokov's world its richness, its variety. We also have the use of black humor when he talks about his mother's death. And we only get these details: a freak accident, picnic, comma, lightning. So right there, we are asked to fill in the details ourselves. It's this horrible beginning, but it's just funny the way that he understates it. One of the most significant things about this beginning is the tone that it establishes. We have these bits of black humor, which seem fitting because this is, after all, a murderer's confessional. So it is a crime story that we are reading. However, the way it reads is as a fairy tale. In the beginning, he talks about this idyllic childhood spent in Paris and then alongside the Riviera. He talks about Russian princesses and old, rich American ladies. He talks about the tragic death of his mother, which is, of course, one of the great fairy tale motifs. And then he talks about the blossoming of himself in precocious sexuality. The last thing about this beginning, though, is just how well it establishes our main character. We have in the opening line his self-obsession. Lolita, my sin, my soul, my life, my fire. We have the narrator's self-obsession. Lolita, my life, my loins, my sin, my soul. And then we immediately have, after this confessional about Lolita, the narrator jumping into his childhood. This is not a man who's talking about his love for someone else. This is a man who's talking about his love for himself. He is entirely self-obsessed, and what he wants to do is to seduce you to his side by telling us this fairy tale upbringing. It's this monstrously, devilishly cruel and wicked, but wonderfully clever way of getting us, the jury, the reader, on his side. And it's for that reason this remains one of the strongest, most bewildering beginnings of all time. Hi guys, thank you so much for watching that. If you enjoyed that, go ahead and consider subscribing to my channel or also following me on Substack. And if you really like what I do, you might also consider checking out my book, Cheers! Around the World in 80 Toasts, a compendium of all the different ways to toast around the world. Thank you so much. Happy reading.